I was asked a little while ago to do a video on the shall not be infringed clause of the Second Amendment. So here we go. Next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. Yes, the actual Constitution, and teach the rising generation to be free. I am glad you could join me today. As always, I'm going to point you to the website, constitutionstudy.com. There you'll see all the work that I'm doing. You'll see some new products starting to show up. It's where you can ask questions. It's where you can comment. It's where you can engage and participate. And most of all, find information you can share with others. Whether you want to help me by doing just that, taking my information and sharing it around. I just did a webinar this morning for a Rotary Club. That was a lot of fun. Or if you can help, either by buying some of my products, buying my books, my online classes when they start showing up, or just donating to the cause, that would all be greatly appreciated. It helps fund these videos to make sure they can happen, to make sure I can get this information out to more people. So if you can join in, I would greatly appreciate it. Now, as I said, I was specifically asked to do a video on the shall not be infringed clause, but I hate taking things too much out of context. So let's set the context just a little bit. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, basic English. There are two parts to that amendment. There's what I call an establishing clause, and there's an establishing phrase, and there's a command phrase. See, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state explains why we have the Second Amendment to protect a right. We have to remember the Constitution doesn't grant unalienable rights. It protects our unalienable rights. And it's saying right there, the states need to have militias. They need to have an armed populace. You know, we today equate a militia with the National Guard or the reserves, but technically a militia is an armed people. So we have to have an armed people. Why? So our states remain secure. So they remain free. Now, whether that's to protect them from outside invaders or to protect them from an over-encroaching federal government, in order for the state to remain secure, in order for the state to be able to tell the federal government, no, that is beyond the agreement we came to, that is beyond the Constitution, we will not do that, they have to have a way to stand up, and that's called the militia, that's called an armed populace. So since that is the requirement, what we have is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, it's important to understand the term the people in the entire Constitution always refers to the individual people of the United States. You, me, our neighbors, our families. It does not mean a group, it does not mean a government, it does not mean the state, and it certainly does not mean the militia. So the right of the people, your right, my right, to keep and bear arms. Again, not terribly difficult language. To keep means to own something. You may keep a pet. You may keep a mistress. You may keep a particular collection of cars. So to keep arms means the ability to own them, to keep them, to have them. And to bear, well, bear does not mean an animal in the woods. To bear means to carry them. So your right to keep and bear, to own and carry arms. Notice it doesn't say firearms, it says arms, which means guns, knives, swords, chemical sprays. These are all common. Now we can get into an interesting discussion, and maybe I will some other time, about how far that arms should go, but the right of the people, you and I, to both keep and bear arms, including firearms, shall not be infringed. Now, those words are very simple, but they're also very powerful. Webster's 1828 dictionary says shall implies a promise, a command or determination. For example, you shall receive your wages. It's not an if. It's not conditional. It's something that must happen. It is a command. It is not a suggestion. It is not an inference. It's not a maybe. It is a command. So shall is a definitive article. Now, not is obviously a negative. So shall not means there is a command, there is a promise. This will not happen. Now, what is this that will not happen? Well, the term is infringe, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, what does it mean to infringe? See, if you follow courts, they say, well, as long as you can keep and bear some sort of arm, your right isn't infringed. But is that what the dictionary says? Is that what the English word even means? Well, again, according to Webster's 1828 dictionary, infringe means to break as contracts, to violate either positively by contravention or negatively by non-fulfillment or neglect of performance. So when the Constitution, when the supreme law of the land says, your and my right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, it means it shall not be broken. It shall not be violated. It shall not be destroyed. It shall not be hindered. That basically means any law which restricts, infringes, inhibits, transgresses, or neglects your right to keep and bear arms is not only unconstitutional, it's void. Oh yeah, they don't like to hear that, do they? You see, both Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 and Justice Marshall in the Marbury versus Madison decision both said that any law that is repugnant to the Constitution is void. It doesn't exist. It's of no force at all. So when these judges, when these politicians, when these states and cities say, well, we're not infringing, we're restricting. Well, that's an oxymoron. And we'll let you decide who the moron is. Anything that infringes on your right to keep and bear arms is a violation of the Constitution. Therefore, it's a violation of the supreme law of the land and is null and void. Quoting Alexander Hamilton from Federalist 78, there is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it was exercised, is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than the principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid. See, it's real simple, but then again, once you involve politicians and lawyers, no simple language is simple anymore. The Constitution says your right to keep and bear arms cannot be violated by government. It cannot be infringed upon. It cannot be restricted, except, going to other parts of the Constitution, by due process of law. Amendment 5 says you can be deprived of liberty by due process. So unless you have been tried and convicted of a crime, your right to keep and bear arms is yours. And according to Alexander Hamilton, any law that would infringe on that is void. It is of no effect, except we don't treat them that way. Why is that? Well, that's because we don't read and study the Constitution. Even back in 1801, in the Marbury versus, I believe it was 1801, the Marbury versus Madison decision, Chief Justice Marshall recognized that any law made by the government contrary to the Constitution is void. But you see, we've been taught that laws don't just come from Congress anymore. The courts can make law, except they can't. We treat these judicial opinions as law. So when we have state and local governments and even the federal government making laws that infringe on your and my right, and then we have courts who work for these same governments, rubber stamp them and say, yes, that isn't unconstitutional, you can do that. They get away with it because we the people are ignorant. It's simple. We are ignorant or we're apathetic. We either don't know that it's wrong or we don't care that it's wrong. That we don't stand up and say, No, the Constitution says shall not be infringed, and we won't put up with it. And by the way, that's exactly the reason I said one of the reasons we have the Second Amendment is to protect the right to keep and bear arms so that when a government goes beyond its delegated powers, we the people can stand up and say, no, that's too far. Here's my proof. The Constitution says shall not be infringed. Your law infringes, therefore it is not valid. If you come to enforce it, you'll have a problem. But we can't do it individually. We have to work together. We start by knowing what the Constitution says. Then we learn how to hold our elected officials accountable to their oath to support it. We learn to stand together to protect each other and each other's rights. And only then will this ship of state stop heading towards tyranny and begin to turn back towards liberty. So I hope you like that. The person who asked for this particular video, what do you think? What do all of you think? When the Constitution says shall not be infringed, does it mean shall not be infringed? And when our elected representatives and the judges who are hired by them to secure justice, ignore the rule of law, and our elected representatives that are there to hold them accountable don't do their job, what do we do to hold them accountable? You see, I keep saying we point at politicians and we point at judges, but we forget that the politicians are there because we elected them. They work for us. We hold them accountable, except we don't. So if you have a problem with your federal government, your state government, your local government, or any of the judges, look yourself right in the mirror and ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? Hopefully you'll head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You'll find out more about what we're doing. You'll educate yourself. These are simple truths. They're not rocket science. Only politicians and lawyers could make this complicated. Learn for yourself. Learn to hold your elected officials accountable. And then the next time one of them comes up with some harebrained scheme to infringe on your right to keep and bear arms, remind them point blank, they swore or affirmed they would support the Constitution. If they will not do that, they are unqualified for office. They are derelict in their duty, and they must be removed. And if they still won't do it, then find your neighbors, find your friends, and find somebody who will protect your rights rather than infringe on them. So that, I hope I will see you next time on the Constitution. Have a great day.
Wherever you make your stand, came from a long through line of everyday American.